Good evening, everyone. We are going to call tonight's meeting to order. We will start with an approval of the agenda. Can I have a motion to approve tonight's agenda? Councillor Stevens and Councillor McIntosh, any questions or comments? All in favor? And that is carried unanimously. Any disclosures of direct or indirect pecuniary interest? Deputy Mayor?
Thank you, Your Worship. I have declared that, and I apologize, I don't have the item in front of me, but when we are discussing the grants, I've declared I'm a member of the Optimist Club, and there is a grant in there for the Optimist Club. So I've asked if we could split that, and I'm hoping you'll grant my request so that I could not be present for the Optimist portion, but could be present for the other piece.
Thank you very much, Deputy Mayor. So that is 13.1.11 that you've declared a conflict on. Was there any other disclosures of direct or indirect pecuniary interest? Seeing none, there is a recommendation that a closed meeting of council be held pursuant to Section 239, subsection 2 of the Municipal Act for the purposes of considering the following subject matters: the closed council minutes from the 29th of April and a confidential verbal report from David Smith, CAO, regarding the sale of municipal property, a proposed or pending acquisition or disposition of land by the municipality or local board. Can I have a motion to move into closed? Councillor Andrews and Councillor Pendergast, all in favor? And that is carried unanimously. We are now in closed session and will resume and open at 7 o'clock. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's council meeting. We are going to begin with the singing of our national anthem. I would ask that you please rise if you're able. I'm glad we had a full house for that tonight. We would like to acknowledge the treaty lands and territory of the Williams Treaty Nations and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. We also recognize that Dufferin County is the traditional territory of the Wendat and the Haudenosaunee and is home to many Indigenous people today. Tonight's meeting is being aired on public television and or streamed live and may be taped for later public broadcast or webcast. Your name is part of the public record and will be included in the minutes of tonight's meeting. Any member of the public connecting via telephone is reminded to press *6 to mute and unmute. Please remain muted until the chair requests comments or questions from the public. Ahead of tonight's open meeting, we did have a closed session. The recommendation coming out of close in our Horizon report is that the minutes of the April 29th, 2024 closed council meeting be approved, and that the confidential verbal report from David Smith, CAO, regarding sale of municipal property, regarding a proposed or pending acquisition or disposition of land by the municipality or local board be received, and that staff proceed as directed. Can I have a motion, please? Councillor Sherwood and Councillor McIntosh, any questions or comments? All in favor? And that's carried unanimously. Next, we have the adoption of the council minutes from April 29th. Can I have a motion to approve those, please? Deputy Mayor and Councillor Andrews, questions or comments on the minutes? All in favor? And that is carried unanimously. We will now move into question period. I'll start to see if there's anybody on the line joining us via telephone, Jerry. No, seeing none. Is there anybody in the gallery who wishes to come up and ask a question? Okay, seeing none. We will move. Oh, go ahead. No problem. If you can just turn on your mic there, we'll get it on for you. It's on there, Mr. Gristo.
Oh, it's
You can
already.
just go ahead, do your name and address for the record, please.
Okay, my name is Nick Gristo. I live on 20 Paula Court, L9W5V1. Anyway, Madam Mayor, the reason Deputy Mayor, member of the council, member staff, good evening to everyone. Those in attendance here, those at home. Anyway, I have a couple of questions, Madam Mayor. The first question is, I think I raised this issue before. It's related to the gentleman, the older gentleman that he cannot do his driveway. He doesn't have no relatives, and he already contacted me again. And he said to me, he says, did you bring it to the attention of a council? And I say, yes, I did. So I wonder when you guys gonna either call a public meeting on that issue or when you're gonna be dealing with that. That would be my first question.
Mr. Gristo, there's not going to be a public meeting necessarily for it. It's gone to committees. So both the age-friendly committee and the accessibility committee are looking at options on how we could proceed with residential snow clearing option for anybody who's interested. It will then come to council once there's a recommendation come out of committee. We're heading into summer, so I'm not sure how quickly it'll be dealt with. I would think that potentially in the fall, probably late fall, we may have a recommendation come out of the committees.
Okay, thank you. The next question I have, it's related. I received a few phone calls since the last time I was here. I raised the issue of Hanson Boulevard. Now the bridge is done. The key question is to put the road through. So the residents in the area, they have certain issues there for safety. Because they said that, it takes too long to get around it. So especially if they got to go to an emergency or whatever, right? So I'd like to know how soon you guys gonna punch the road through.
Mr. Gristo, the town of Orangeville doesn't own the land, so we are waiting for the developer to move forward with the road. We've had several updates at council over the last number of months about what that timing is going to look like, and it is pending the developer's movement on it. We anticipate it'll move forward soon, but I don't have a date for you on that.
So you don't have a date?
No.
The other key question it is, and I know this, because you all know I said it here a long time. You have the power to expropriate the land for the road, okay? You do have that power. So the sooner, the better. That's all I'm going to say.
We feel the same way as you. We'd love to
I
get the road
understand
built
you
as
wait
soon as
for the
possible.
developer and everything, but if the developer he never wants to build there, or he never wants to sell the road, what are you going to do?
No, the developer is very motivated to actually build the road because they want to proceed with their development, and they can't proceed with their development until they're building the road. So they are motivated as well. It's a brand new owner of that land that purchased it in 2022. So they're moving quickly. Previously, it was owned by another developer, but now that this developer that owns it is motivated to move ahead. So
Terrific.
thank you for your questions,
you.
Mr. Gristo. Was there anybody else in the gallery who had any questions? We just need you close to the microphone there.
My name is Max Felice, and I live on 21 Ontario Street for the last 52 years. And for this reason, I'm here tonight. I came 10 years ago to talk to the CAO, Mr. Brennan, that there is unsafe condition on Ontario Street because kids going to the corner for the school to pick up the bus, they're on the street and there's no chance in hell because there's nowhere they can go in the winter. So now, after, what's his name? The Mayor Williams, when he was in power, I was told by Mr. Brennan that something is happening and the whole subdivision is going to get looked after. There was a 5-year plan, and it didn't occur on his committee. But the following one, which was Mr. Brown, and some of you were on that thing, it was carried on and started, and they did Princess Street. When that was finished, took 3 years. The next thing you know, I was told Ontario Street is coming within a couple of months. But COVID hit first, so everything was blown away. Nobody's fault. But then it wasn't put on a shelf and put it when you can. It disappeared. Is there any planning this year for Ontario Street?
Mr. Felice, your neighborhood road reconstruction is being done this year. There's actually a public information meeting coming up this week on May 16th to deal with the road construction that's being done in your neighborhood.
Or is this something?
Mr. Koslak, did you want to add to that?
Yep, through your worship, we're in the process of awarding the contract for the reconstruction. Once we have the contractor on board and we have a schedule, notices will go out to residents. So the reconstruction will be completed this year. It includes the reconstruction of the water main, sewers, road, and I believe installation of sidewalks.
So that includes sidewalks and everything.
Mhm.
And there is no contractor yet.
Yeah, we've tendered the project. We're just dotting the i's and crossing the t's on the contract. So once we have the contract finalized, then we'll have dates from the contractor and we'll send out letters to the public.
So then I come back to the chair. So there is no room this year for anything to be done. Is there?
It's being done this year.
It is
Work
done this
being
year.
done this year.
I see.
And if you want to come to a public information session, it's this week on the 16th from 4 to 6 here at Town Hall in the atrium.
I've seen it on. I already had made up a plan to come and see you.
Perfect. Then we'll see you then.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Felice.
So I didn't waste the 10 years.
What's that?
I didn't waste the 10 years.
No, it's being done. We're here for you.
I've seen Mr. Smith already. He knows what I'm talking about.
Yep.
So I have to wait until this is over. Thank you.
Thank you. Was there anybody else in the gallery wishing to ask a question? Okay, we will move into presentations, petitions, and delegations, starting with 12.1, which is Robert Armstrong from 17 Church Street regarding the use of 49 Town Line. You want to come up and have a seat? And just a reminder that you do have 5 minutes.
Hey, good evening, everybody. Good evening to Mayor Post. I am Robert Armstrong at 17 Church Street, L9W3Y8. I've been a resident there for 26 years. I am, good evening to all. I am a banjo player, have been for a long time. And I was the best banjo player in Canada. At one time, I have the trophy at home. I presented the letter back in May the 16th of 2023 to the town councillor, and I asked that this today is being updated as of today, because of that letter, there was a few problems with the use of 49 Town Line. The library at Mill Street wasn't quite completed by then, and I was assured by Dana Fraser that they would be out of there around the 1st of August, and that didn't happen. My proposal is for the exclusive use of the now empty building at 49 Town Line and related car parking on the northeast side of the building, not on the track side. The property is owned by the town of Orangeville and is also used by the Go Bus services. The use would be for jazz, blues, country music, once a month, probably on the last Saturday of each month, possibly more at a later date. We're not too sure yet. And it would operate as a live music venue, like the one we see in New Orleans. Also on Wednesday evenings for lessons, there would be possibly talent nights, sing-alongs, music jams, and a community corner stage. It would also give young people in this area a chance to perform, if they're 14, 15, 16 years of age, to perform in front of a live audience. A picture of the band is included for your viewing. Okay, I am the leader of the band and have played in many venues in Canada and the United States. I also arrange all the music for the band. My experience as an entertainer spans over 40 years. All members from the band who entertain are very talented musicians from Ontario. This is included with this proposal of some locations I have performed at. Some of the places I've performed at has been New Year's Eve at the Orangeville Town Hall, or Town Theatre. YouTube with the Toronto Banjo Band from Markham Fair. The Seguin and Winona Boat Cruises from Gravenhurst. Lulu's Roadhouse in Kitchener for 1 week. Prime Minister Jean Chrétien in Orillia. We did the opening for him. Orangeville Blues and Jazz in the Orangeville Theatre. Orangeville Seniors for Christmas party event, and it was sold out. Katrina benefit in Tottenham area for New Orleans. And I performed in New Orleans. And we also did a homecoming in Hanover for more than 10,000 people on the streets. I've also been to Roy Thompson Hall in Toronto and many appearances. And I'm the leader of the band. It used to be called Bob's Banjo Band. It's now Banjos Plus. We usually go with 3 or 4 banjos, tuba, trumpet, possibly a saxophone, and a washboard. In closing, I have to I've changed the name of the band, yes. Live music at 49 would enhance and be a great benefit to the tourism and the community. With the aging population, the live music we perform is very accepted, and we will be giving back greatly to the community. Tourism will be our daily goal. The venue will be non-alcoholic. No zoning changes are required at 49 Town Line because the present zoning is M1, and an assembly hall is permitted without any changes. I have tried to get a floor plan because we need it for the occupancy load to do with the town's building inspector and the fire department. And haven't had any luck in getting a floor plan. The building, I understand, is about 20 to 21, 22 years old. I have made a business plan, and that's included with my proposal for council members and the town's staff to review. The plan is included with this proposal for the exclusive use of the building at 49 Town Line. I'm sure this venue will be a success, as has the 3-day blues and jazz for approximately 20 years. The approval of this proposal can mean an opening night of possibly June the 29th of this year. Let's bring New Orleans music to Orangeville and promote tourism. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Armstrong.
Thank you.
Was there any questions from members of council for Mr. Armstrong at this time? Yeah, Mr. Stevens, Councillor Stevens.
Thank you, Mr. Armstrong. Just wondering if you've had a chance to meet with Ms. Savage about the building.
Yes, I have.
Okay. And I know it's going to be a rental platform. So I'm just wondering if maybe, coinciding with the town, whether that would work.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Armstrong. Any other questions from members of council? At this time, Mr. Armstrong, we're not quite ready to make a decision on that building, but we will receive your proposal tonight and we'll put it aside until we're ready to make some final determinations with that building. But we appreciate your time tonight. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Mayor Post.
Thank you. Up next, we do have item 12.2, which is Jennifer Payne, the Executive Director of HCIA, doing a presentation of Orangeville Community Grants Program Report of Recommendations. I do need a motion, though. Ms. Payne did submit ahead of council that she needs a little longer than the 5-minute time frame. So I'd like to ask for council to please waive the 5-minute regulation in the procedural bylaw to permit Jennifer Payne to address council. Deputy Mayor and Councillor Andrews, any questions? All in favor? And that's carried unanimously. Ms. Payne, you have up to 15 minutes.
Thank you and good evening, Mayor Post, members of council, and my friends on staff. It's my delight to be here with you this evening to present the report of recommendations for the Orangeville Grants Program, Community Grants Program. I'm Jennifer Payne. I'm Executive Director of Headwaters Communities in Action, and it's my pleasure to bring you this report. This is highlights of our process and our report of recommendations. The full report is in your package, and I'll be happy to take questions after this brief presentation of the highlights. I'd like to start with a bit of an introduction and a little bit of background and an overview of our process, and as well as our conclusions. I want to start with a big thank you to Town Council and staff for entrusting this important work to us. We don't take it lightly, and we hope that you agree with our conclusions and that it was an important and successful partnership. I wanted to also offer a big thank you to our assessment team. This was not an easy task to undertake, and so they were very diligent in their tasks and their responsibility for bringing you some very well considered and highly debated conclusions in our recommendations. That said, our recommendations are just that, they're recommendations, and so the final decision ultimately rests with council. And finally, a big shout out to all the applicants. There were so many wonderful projects that were proposed, so many amazing organizations doing good work for the citizens of Orangeville. It was very difficult to say no to any of them for any amounts. And so I just wanted to say a little bit about how everyone is bringing forward very beneficial projects, and we hope that they're able to continue in some fashion. You might ask, who is HCIA? For those who aren't familiar with our work, Headwaters Communities in Action is a registered charity and a community backbone organization. We've been around since 2004, so it's a big year for us, but we're registered since 2009. The projects that we support serve a long-term vision of community well-being, and you might recognize some of our supported projects through these logos on the screen. Volunteer Dufferin operates on our backbone, Headwaters Food and Farming Alliance, DC Moves, the Dufferin County Equity Collaborative, Voices of Lived Experience Dufferin. We're a newly minted local chapter of the Grand Palace program. The Dufferin Community Foundation also grew up on our backbone before they became an independent organization. And of course, we do a number of partnerships with the County of Dufferin, including their Community Grants program, which led to this partnership. We primarily, our charitable purpose is to do research, education, engagement, and action on community priorities that serve community well-being. And we do that through collaboration, connection, and community conversations. And we also really like alliterations, as you can tell. So I'll do a brief overview of our timeline, our standard timeline for this process. Started with our application intake, including promotion of the Community Grants program. We discussed with town staff the process, the timeline, as well as any updates to the form or instructions for potential applicants. And I want to thank my partners, new friends on the staff. Rebecca and Patrick were very helpful in providing guidance and partnership through this process. So the application form was open from February 1st to March 31st. We conducted an information session, public information session on March 11th, which was well attended and produced some good questions from the community. And at the close of that intake period, the town forwarded the applications to HCIA, which takes us to step 2, the assessment and report process. Scoring occurred from April 1st to 13th. We convened the assessment team. First of all, we promoted a recruitment through public information and came up with a group of 7 individuals, 5 of whom are citizens of Orangeville. And so we convened them. They each scored separately, and then we had a group meeting to calibrate the scores together. And then the report was prepared and submitted by May 1st for this council meeting. Third is council decision. So hopefully tonight you agree with our recommendations and are able to accept the report. And then the funds are typically, the idea was for funds to be dispersed by early June in order to support the summer events that are coming up being proposed. And again, the final decision is with council. Our report is just recommendations, of course. And finally, as a fourth step that may or may not have occurred in the past, this is something that we've done for the county, is to, and I think there's some interest here as well, is to share recipient stories. So once the grants are distributed and the projects happen, it's always nice to circle back and share the impact of those funds on the community. And we do that by soliciting impact reports. It doesn't necessarily have to be overly onerous on the applicant. We're not looking to create an onerous process to report back, but we just want to hear how those funds were used and how they impacted the community. So a little peek behind the curtain of our assessment process within HCIA. Again, as I mentioned, we did a recruitment of the assessment team. We held an orientation kickoff meeting. We do have a terms of reference that govern how we operate together. Each member went away and did their own individual scoring according to a standard spreadsheet and form. We then met together as a group and amalgamated those scores together, looked at where we had areas of agreement, where we had areas of disagreement, and that calibration process is really important to allow people to broadly discuss each application in turn and come up with a calibrated consensus suggestion for both a yes or no, and then the amount to be recommended for granting. Then we prepare the report and submit it to the treasurer and for your consideration here at council. There are a number of things that go into our consideration of each application. And I'm sure everybody's very curious about how we go about coming up with our recommendations. There are certain areas that the applicant can influence and that contribute to the overall quality of an individual application. And then there are context pieces or areas that they cannot necessarily control, but that have to be considered in our deliberations. So things like eligibility, the alignment with the town's strategic plan and priorities, the perceived benefit to the community or whether that benefit was accurately demonstrated or appropriately demonstrated, the plan for how they intend to use the funds, and then the budget, whether it makes sense for what they're anticipating or proposing to do. Those are all areas within the applicant's control and that come out through the application. Then we have to layer onto that considerations like the amount of funds available or allotted for the community grants program, the mix of project types. While it's not necessarily we're trying to fit a number of key areas, we do like to try to spread the funds around for different purposes and for different subpopulations. So we do take that into consideration where it comes out, whether we've distributed or recommended the funds to be distributed broadly, and then how well they align with the town's strategic priorities. The overall comparative quality of applications. So when you're writing your own report, you have no idea what quality and approach of applications are coming in from others. And so we have to do that a little bit of side-by-side comparison when we have them all in place. We look at organizational credibility, how long the organization's been around, and whether they've previously received funds from the town. We have what we call as a head, heart, and hands type of scoring, where the head tells us whether it makes sense, whether the eligibility is met, criteria are met. The heart score is that heartstring tug that I'm sure you're all familiar with when you've had appeals to council. It's very hard to say no to a very good project, and it doesn't necessarily mean that it's not a good project that doesn't get funded, but we do weigh that in. We're not robots. If you wanted a strict rubric followed, then you could have a computer do that. But we are humans, and we want to make sure we acknowledge when there is a heartfelt cause to the community, and particularly one that hasn't already been filled or doesn't have a parallel. And then the hand score is really whether that project plan makes sense and whether the budget makes sense for what they're proposing to do. And as part of our holistic scoring approach as well, we look at the feasibility of partial funding. So I don't know if that's something that's been approached before, but we look at the budget to see if there are aspects that are scalable or things that could be done with fewer funds. We don't try to tell the applicant where to use those partial funds, but where we see in the budget that there's an opportunity to fund partial, then we take that under consideration. So a few quick highlight observations. This was hard. I won't beat around the bush. I know you know from experience that it's hard to decline good projects that are, well-intentioned and that do good for the community. And I truly believe that all of our applicants this year fit in that category. So it was really down to the high quantity of applications as well as their high quality. I think that the promotion and the information session helped to improve the quality of overall applications. The hard fact was we had limited funds to distribute it. And so while it's always good news to distribute funds, it's hard to say no. So there will be some disappointment in this report, and we anticipate that. The requested funds came in at 4 times the available allocation. The group wanted to fund all requests, and unfortunately, that's just not possible. But the assessment team did suggest an additional workshop, perhaps to assist prospective applicants for the next round with more in-depth and perhaps one-on-one coaching on grant writing. Also wanted to acknowledge that the timeline was tight, and I know that's just a function of where it fell on the schedule, and just from our own perspective, it was hot on the tails of the DEFRAN process. But it's a new process for us, so there were a few new aspects to consider. But all in all, I think it came through as well as could be expected, and I'm really thankful to Rebecca and Patrick for helping make that happen. Okay, here are the numbers. The funds requested, again, were 307% of available funds, or roughly 4 times. Funds we had available to work with were $56,800, and that is the net amount of previously committed multi-year funds, as well as one grant application that fell under a project that HCIA supports that we had submitted prior for the HFFA Headwaters Farm Fresh Guide. So we had 56,800 to work with. Total requests came in at $231,204. So a bit of a stark difference there. We had 25 applications, of which 20 were recommended for some amount. Don't expect you to be able to read this slide, but this is the list of our recommendations. You will see that some are at 0, and most came through at partial. And I believe there was just one that was recommended for its full amount. It wasn't a large amount comparatively. There were a number of large asks this round. I don't know if that's typical for this program, but yeah, it just wasn't possible to. And some may seem like a drop in the bucket, but there were some that wanted to give some support to and show some level of contribution. And it's just a different way of displaying the proportions of where the funds were recommended to go. And then as a whole, some highlights here. We saw a good mix of beneficial initiatives that will serve the citizens of Orangeville well. We saw different subpopulations targeted and also different areas of focus. We saw subpopulations from youth, schools, seniors, parents, people with disabilities, as well as general public projects. And the focus areas included arts and music, sports, mental health, community events, and food. So a nice cross-section there. There were many partial or no funding recommendations, and the lists of reasons for that are in the report. We tried to stick to a preset list of reasons for choosing to not recommend or to recommend a partial. And those reasons include a cross-section of the aspects you saw in our holistic approach. So there are things like the application's merits, eligibility concerns, competing applications, demonstrated need, and community benefits, as well as the budget or plan not being clear. Applicants were invited to ask questions either individually. We shared email addresses for both the town and myself. We also provided that information session, and we'll continue to do that for next round. I think it was very valuable. So just a little diagram here about next steps and what our process is. We'll look at this process again for 2025. Actually, I won't walk through all the steps because I'm at time, but I just wanted to take a moment to thank you again for entrusting us with this task. It was a learning experience for all of us as well. And I hope that we've done you proud in our project for you. So I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much, Ms. Payne. First of all, I just want to thank you for the presentation, and I read the report with great interest. I thought your commentary and your points were very, very thoughtful. So I just want to thank you and the entire group for all the commentary that you put in there. I know that was a huge ask to try and give, everybody a little something, and I think you did it very thoughtfully. So thank you for that. I've got some questions from Council. Deputy Mayor first, and then Councillor Andrews.
Thank you, Worship. Thank you for your presentation as always. I enjoyed it when I saw it at the county, and I'm very appreciative again here. It's unfortunately skipped over the slide where you talk about the timeline, but maybe my question can just be pointed. You mentioned that it was a bit taxing on your organization. I'd love to continue the relationship with your organization and have you continue to do this. I just think the process makes sense with you versus with, I hate the word politician, but with the politicians, right? It's much better if it's from a third party. How do we make it easier on you in terms of timing for your organization? Because you're going to think about it. I saw it briefly. We'll start to talk about budget and think about budget in the fall. Then we start to get into it in the late part of the year, continuing into 2025, the early part. How do we best work with you? What would you like to see?
Well, I think we can certainly work with staff to talk about the timeline. I think partly this year it was a new process. So there was a learning curve for both of us. And I'm also able to discuss the timeline with the county for next round as well. So we can sort out how that gets done. I may also be able to add resources so that it's not
taxing.
Yeah, exactly. So
just last thing, if I could, I loved your commentary about thoughtful. That's exactly the word that I wanted to use too. And thank you again. It was very thoughtful.
Thank you.
Councillor Andrews.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. And again, I echo the two of you on how thoughtful this process was. A very difficult one, especially with the number of applicants and the numbers that were approved. The piece that really struck a chord to me was the scalable approach that you have taken under a very short timeline. And, I know that the pressure is on many organizations to seek as much funding as possible. And the difficulty we have in today's society is that there's just not as much money as there once was for many of these organizations. At one point, you could have gone to a council and hopefully garner, the ask that you have. I think upon review of this report, you've distributed the funds appropriately with the opportunity with some new applicants to consider, obviously, 2025. And the second comment is taking a look at, I would almost have it as a compulsory element to attend the workshop. Optional is probably not acceptable in this case, especially with a new process that is hands-free of us. And I'm not sure, was that one of the criteria that in fact determined if some of the applicants were approved or not, or it was just by happenstance, if they were there, they asked the right questions, they got the information they needed? Because I know that, some of the applicants themselves probably learned a lot about the process that's required to garner, hopefully, some approved funds from council.
Perhaps. It was not a requirement to attend the information session. And just personally, I always hesitate to make anything mandatory just because for accessibility reasons and for equity reasons, we try to be as open and accessible as possible. Sometimes people can't make it for that Monday evening. So that's just my personal comment on that. But, and no, it did not go into the consideration for whether they were approved or not, or recommended or not. We try to make all avenues open for supporting someone to construct an application. And so that's why we invited even actually that presentation was also made available for a replay on YouTube. And so, we wouldn't be tracking who's viewed it or not. I would say that it would probably help them be more competitive if they did, because it was full of recommendations on what to focus on. If you had to give more weight or more attention to specific questions, then that would serve them better. So we like to hope that that's a valuable resource that they would consider when submitting an application, but it was not required.
Thank you for that. And, I know that this was somewhat of a learning process for all parties involved, as much as you have the expertise with your organization. But for any organization that may be seeking funds for 2025, at least we have this first iteration completed. And, the timeline is going to be a little stretched out now. So there's opportunities for people to learn a lot more. And I also appreciate your comment regarding the compulsory attendance, or at least awareness of, going through a workshop.
Thank you, Councillor Andrews. Councillor Stevens?
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you for your presentation. Just wondering, did your committee reach out to those that asked for money last time? And I'm just wondering if you missed anybody, like if anybody is going to come to us in the next 3-4 months from now saying, oh, I missed that.
Well, thank you for the question. I think that would be a question for the staff to say whether previous applicants had been reached out to. I think there was opportunity given to be updated on the process. Most of the process stayed the same. It's just that it wasn't an open intake this time, and that it was one time. So to your point about people missing it, you may hear some come back saying, I missed the window, can I still come and request funds? And that would of course be up to council. However, there was the possibility of a second round if funds were left over. Obviously, that was not going to be the case for 2024, may be the case for 2025. So it's a possibility of perhaps increasing the allocation to recognize that there is a lot more demand in the community. We haven't reached out to anyone individually from past rounds, no.
Thank you. Any additional questions from members of council? Seeing none. Thank you so much for being here, Ms. Payne. We appreciate it. Thank you. Up next, we have 12.3, which is Deputy Mayor Taylor is actually going to give a presentation regarding the OPP Detachment Board.
Very good. Thank you, Your Worship. I'm going to be brief. I'm just going to take the next 90 minutes and take you through OPP policy updates. Does that sound exciting to everyone? This council and members of the gallery, this is a commitment that the OPP board made to council to continue to come back and make sure that we were communicating and sharing what was going on in our lives and how things were going with the board. So try and be as brief as I can. We have been through what I would say is a bit of a difficult time. And by a difficult time, I don't mean a trying time. I just mean it was difficult to try and figure out what we were supposed to be doing. And what specifically has happened is April 1st of this year, the new CSPA from the province came into effect. And it changed the way that we deal with boards or deal on the Police Services Board. And so specifically what happened is, and I'll just be quick catching everybody up and then I'll go into the details, but Dufferin County in particular went from 8 Police Services Boards to 4. And our detachment in particular, we increased to 6 members from 5. So we changed our makeup overall. And right now, because the province has changed who can be on the board, we don't have a provincial member. And we were waiting for council to nominate 2 people to be on the board. So we were actually sitting ducks for a period of time. The good news is we continued to work behind the scenes, but we couldn't meet because we didn't have quorum. And on top of that, all of us had to take courses through the province to be able to sit on the Police Services Board. And that timeline is ticking. Most of us have taken them, which is good, but there's still a few, myself included, who needs to finish that challenge. So that's what's happened as an overview. Just to remind everyone what OPP detachment boards do. So there's 3 tasks, and basically we have to understand the Canadian Safety and Policing Act, right? That's number 1 for sure. And then what we do in that is we develop and approve bylaws and policies. And the good news is the Orangeville Detachment Board has done that. So we're on top of it. It's been an exercise in extreme detail, as Mayor Post would attest to, I'm sure. So we've done that. And then the next step is we've actually developed service standards, which allow us to hit key dates. So in other words, if a date is 60 days out, we've marked it. We know on May 1st that we have to start a task and make sure that we're going to hit it. And we've done that. So we feel very organized. We're on top of things. And I can tell you, maybe it's just pride, but I think if you were to compare us to some of the other boards, I would think we're leading at this point. And I feel quite positive about where that's going. And what our board needs to do is there's really two things. One is we help input into the overall strategic plan for the OPP. We do not own it. The OPP feed that down, and by strategies, they're talking about what their objectives, priorities are, what are they going to focus on as they move forward. But where we do line in on is what's the local action plan. And the local action plan is essentially tactics that will dovetail with what's going on in our community. And how we'll find out about what's going on in the community. We deal with local businesses. We'd essentially meet with different interest groups in our community and find out what's important to them, and then work that into what this detachment board plan would be for Dufferin County, and then specifically for Orangeville. And so all of those steps are done with the detachment commander leading that. And then the detachment commander brings that to the board. And now it's the boards. And that's where we are. So right now, the board has until, I'm just going to make it June 30th. And on June 30th, we need to be in front of council with what the plan is and how we're going to attack it. So really, we need to have to determine the detachment objectives, right? What are we going to be focusing on? We get to suggest and advise to the detachment commander. And why it's so important to suggest and advise is because we don't get to tell. So the difference is with Orangeville, the Orangeville Police, we would say, we want you to do this. With the OPP, we do not have that same authority. We cannot tell, we can suggest and advise. We also monitor the performance of the detachment commander, right? So are they doing a good job? Are they not doing a good job? And we would write a year-end evaluation on that individual as we went. And then we would also monitor the stats and have conversations with the detachment commander about how they are resourcing to deal with the certain stats. As an example, if Broadway had significant speeding, we would say, hey, it's increased 300% on Broadway, as an example. Our suggestion is this, and they would decide whether or not they were going to take that or not. So the good news is we're on track to do that. We are going to meet our June 30th deadline, and I think, we haven't seen the final result of where we're going to be. We're working through it. As I say, we just got our 2 new members and we haven't been able to meet. So we're kind of under the gun, but we will be meeting that June 30th deadline to be in front of council and consult with you. So that kind of takes care of the steps of where we are and what we're doing. The last thing to inform everybody, and it's not to create any kind of fervor, we're trying to figure it out. But at this point in time, we do know that we have individual board members have insurance. We don't know if the board has insurance. And we're just working that through the province. And I'm just staring at you, CAO Smith, as we try and figure this out. But it's still kind of just sorting out what's happening. And there's just been so many changes that it's been difficult to try and figure out exactly where that's at. But more news to come on that. I don't think it's going to be a big deal. You would assume that we would be covered, but we'll get that sorted as we go. Anyway, so we'll be back in front of you again around about June 30th. And that's the end of my report.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. That 90 minutes just flew by. Appreciate your comments. I think you covered that really well. It's been extremely challenging with some changes in provincial legislation, and we've navigated through them well. Is there any questions from members of council? Councillor McIntosh and then Councillor Stevens.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just one suggestion and one question. I know our hydro board got separate insurance for the board individually, so you might want to check with hydro how they did it. My question is the 2 new board members, how long will their reign be, like till the end of council, or how does that work?
Yeah, end of council term.
Thank you.
Councillor Stevens?
Thank you, Your Worship. Mine is more of a general question. And if a resident wanted to ask a question to yourself or to your committee, or do they just come to the Police Service Board? That's number one. And I'll just ask my second one. And if they have a recommendation, like they want to get a traffic car, in Orangeville, like Mono has, is that how they would bring that up, or like a
specific traffic unit?
Yeah.
Traffic. An enhancement.
Thank you.
Deputy Mayor?
Yes, so I would encourage any member of the public if they had an issue, and candidly and privately, there was something that Councillor Andrews and I was working on tonight. The resident contacted Councillor Andrews. Councillor Andrews referred it to myself as chair of the Police Services Board. I'll bring that to the Police Services Board in conjunction with the inspector. We'll work through what potentially could be done. And why I think that process is important, again, is we can't tell the OPP what to do. Right? Politicians cannot tell the police what to do. And I think that's really good. And all of us communicate so well. And I thought today worked out really well. And we'll make sure that that resident gets feedback. And then the secondary piece to that is if anyone wants to come to the Police Services Board, the doors are open. They're certainly welcome to come. We essentially meet, you're supposed to meet 4 times a year. I would say that we're probably meeting 8 would be my guess because of the business that we need to do. But the public is welcome to those sessions. And if they want to speak or ask about something, they can either ask the board or ask the inspector. And we're happy to have those discussions. But we're open to ideas for sure. Many people are upset about safety. That would be what we hear most about, but certainly the inspector's been very open to do.
The only other comment that I would add to that, Councillor Stevens, is that at any time, if there's an issue in a neighborhood that a resident wants to bring forward, they should really report it to the non-urgent OPP line. They do register that call for service, and they use that data of where they're getting complaints and concerns to direct their existing traffic unit. So we already do have a traffic unit in Orangeville, which is a bit different than how Mono is set up, but they deploy those resources based on feedback that they're hearing and other things. But the more calls for service that they're hearing in a specific area will help to inform some of that. So that would be the only other addition I would add.
Thank you. I will inform the people who call me. Thank you.
Any additional questions from any members of council? Nope, seeing none. Thank you very much, Deputy Mayor. 12.4, we have Murray Short, a partner at RLB LLP, bringing our 2023 draft audited financial statements. There is a note here that this delegate has also requested additional time, so I do need a motion to waive the procedural bylaw to allow Mr. Short a maximum of 10 minutes. Councillor Stevens and Councillor McIntosh, all in favor? And that is carried unanimously. Mr. Short, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I will do my best to keep it to those 10 minutes. So we have a presentation. What I would propose to do is walk through the presentation. The draft audited financial statements are also included within Council's package as part of the Finance Department's report. So I'll just present the presentation itself, but happy to answer any questions on the statements as well. So first off, and am I able to scroll through or do I need? Okay. Okay, I'll just, there we go. Okay, so, sorry, jumped ahead a bit. Just in terms of an audit overview, materiality for our audit, which is a number that we use in order to kind of assess the type of testing that we're doing, and ultimately allows us to sign off on our audit report saying that the financial statements are materially correct, was 2.5 million. That is a number that we use based on the kind of total asset base for the municipality, which obviously includes your infrastructure and so on. Sounds like a very large number, but when we look at the testing, we're using random sampling basis. We're using kind of amounts that are much lower. Sometimes in our random samples, we might look at a $20 transaction just as readily as a $20,000 transaction. So it's not a indication of the amount of testing we're doing, but it's ultimately what allows us to sign off on our audit report. We did provide to council a letter back in the fall highlighting some of the key elements of our audit plan. And so I'm reporting today that there were no changes to that audit plan from when we reported to council in that letter in the fall to today. We followed that audit plan and so there were no changes. We did make one recommendation in our management letter regarding capital budgeting. As we'll see when we get into the presentation itself, the municipality has a fair number of projects that kind of get carried forward. I know that in our conversations with the finance department, there's kind of a backlog of capital projects. But sometimes what happens then with projects that kind of carry on and aren't completed in the year they're intended, may not even be completed in the following year or two, with cost escalations and so on, that the budget sometimes isn't necessarily as accurate as you might like. And so just to kind of be aware of that and make sure that that's kind of reflected in kind of future capital budgeting processes. We didn't have any concerns with the conduct of our audit. Thank you to the finance staff, some of whom are here today, for their diligence and good work over the course of the year, but also supporting us getting through the audit. Going through an audit is no small feat, to be sure, so we're very happy for the support that we received in the course of the audit. To keep things moving, the audit report is a clean audit opinion. We do present the financial statements in draft today, so we haven't signed our audit report. Basically, we require council's approval in order to finalize our audit report and sign it off. So it's presented in draft, but we are concluding that the financial statements are presented fairly in accordance with Canadian public sector accounting standards. So we will sign off subject to your review and approval. The statement of financial position shows the assets, liabilities, and non-financial assets of the municipality at the end of the year with comparatives from the prior year. So I'm just showing it up on screen here. Just to kind of highlight a few key things. Cash, when we combine the top three lines, cash, restricted cash, and temporary investments, total is about 102 million. That's down very slightly from last year at 103.3. So down a little over $1 million. But when you're talking about that kind of quantum, it's not a significant decrease. Other financial assets you can see are up. Taxes receivable is up by about 600,000. That's not surprising. We're seeing that across all of our municipal clients. Seems to be that over the last couple of years that taxes receivable seem to have crept up. But when we get to the graphs, you'll see that you're well within what we'd consider to be a low risk situation. Your investment in government business enterprises, that's your investment in Orangeville Hydro, that has increased. Basically, your share of the net income of Orangeville Hydro, less the dividends that you received, the municipality received, is that increase. And so it's up to about 12.5 million. In the liabilities section, you see liabilities very comparable at 63.3 million, down somewhat, or sorry, up slightly, very slightly from last year. Long-term debt is down just because of repayments, but most notably the increase in deferred revenue, which is your development charges, gas tax, and other obligatory reserve funds, is up somewhat to the tune of about $2.3 million. We'll see that in a future page in the presentation. So your net financial assets in total up to 64 million from 62 the year before. Basically, kind of the liquid position of the municipality, if we consider financial assets and liabilities, has increased. What has also increased is your non-financial assets because of your investment in tangible capital assets in the year. So you put about 17 million to capital asset additions, net of amortization of 9 million, or capital assets increased by about 8 million year over year. And as a result, then your accumulated surplus up to 297 million from 286 million the year before, most of that being your investment in capital assets that we'll see on a future slide. So just to walk through a few graphs here, your cash equivalents graph showing the cash equivalents as a percentage of the cash outflows in the year. So all of the cash that the municipality spends over the course of the year, you held about 140% of that in cash at the end of the year. Obviously, with your reserves and reserve funds, there's a reason that those are set aside. So it's not that you're stockpiling a whole bunch of cash. That is reserves and reserve funds for future use. But just showing the relative comparison of your cash position to other comparable municipalities. And we do use a peer group that we feel is representative, and your cash position is somewhat higher than theirs. Taxes receivable, as I mentioned, you can see it's crept up a little bit. The green line being the town of Orangeville, the blue line being that comparator group. So 4.9% of taxes that you collect for your own purposes, as well as for the county and the school boards, 4.9% of that total is sitting in taxes receivable at the end of the year. That is quite a low number. Compared to our other municipal clients, they tend to be higher than that, but it's also higher than the comparator group that we're using when we're comparing the town of Orangeville to other peer municipalities. And you can see on the right-hand side, MMH level of risk, that's the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing. They consider anything less than 10% to be low risk, and you are half that. So that is a good position to be in, despite the fact that your tax receivable have increased somewhat in the last couple of years. Long-term debt, you can see, is fairly comparable, a little higher than, but it's fairly comparable to the other municipalities that we compared you to. About 75% of tax revenue sitting in long-term debt, The comparable group is about 70%. So you're pretty close and not a significant difference from that standpoint. Where we do see a difference is in your capital asset additions. The town of Orangeville has invested typically a little less. Not a comparison that is really a fair one to make. We don't kind of audit any of those other municipalities that we're looking at, and we don't kind of have any sense of what their infrastructure needs are relative to yours. So this isn't a judgment call by any means. It's just a statement that you have typically spent less. Part of that probably relates to that backlog of capital projects that I referred to earlier. And this one highlights the backlog as well. You can see the green bars being the amounts that the municipality budgeted to spend on capital asset additions, much higher in 2021, 2, and 3 than you see were actually spent, being the blue bars. What is, I think, an important comparison is looking at the capital asset additions relative to amortization. It's not a perfect measure, but it does show that you're spending more than what we are kind of estimating as the aging on your infrastructure. So regardless of the fact that you intended to spend more, you are still spending more than what we're kind of considering the aging of that infrastructure to be. And so I think that's a good indication that you're still trying to do your best to maintain the infrastructure that you do have. So the statement of operations is the statement just after the statement of financial position, showing the revenues, expenses, and annual surplus on the year compared to budget and compared to the prior year. You can see that the annual surplus is $10 million. The reason for that is largely because of capital assets as well. So you're raising money for capital asset projects, some of which didn't go ahead. It's a weird nuance of public sector reporting that's revenue even though you didn't spend it. And so it kind of adds to your surplus regardless. Much of that unspent funding going back into reserves and reserve funds, but it still does add to your surplus on the year. The revenue line that is kind of most notably changing from what you'd budgeted $12 million in grant revenue. We're showing 2.9. Again, that relates to capital, much more anticipated to be received and spent for capital projects received from grants from other levels of government. Because you didn't do as much in terms of capital asset additions, you had less revenue and less grants received to cover those expenditures. Otherwise, you can see generally revenues fairly close to budget. Other income down somewhat, but fairly comparable. Your equity income from Orangeville Hydro up versus what you budgeted. On the expense side, you can see generally speaking that your expenses are somewhat below budget across most of the departments. That's just kind of what had transpired in the year, but up somewhat from the prior year. But obviously those increases were budgeted. You did wind up with a $10 million surplus, increasing that accumulated surplus up to the $297 million. I would point out the annual surplus in 2022, that $40 million looks like a surprisingly or astoundingly large number. Largely that was because of the consolidation of ORDC and the sale of lands in ORDC that resulted in an unusual gain in that year. So just looking at expenditures by department, this is pretty consistent, and we go to the next graph, you can see that your expenditures across the different departments fairly consistent. We do see an increase in general government back up to closer to where it was in 2021. 2022, there was lower than average costs, particularly on the staffing side, just because of transitions in staffing in 2022. But otherwise, you can see, generally speaking, your expense is pretty consistent across the various departments from last year to this year. So the statement of changes in net financial assets shows the change in, it takes the surplus and then backs out capital asset activity and then shows that change in net financial assets. As I mentioned, the liquidity of the municipality, it did increase by about 1.8 million. Most of the surplus being as a result of capital asset activity, though, as I said, that $10.3 million augmented by your capital asset, increase in your investment in capital assets on the year. The last main statement is the statement of cash flows. I won't go through this line by line in the interest of time. I'll highlight a few key numbers. About halfway down, you see the 16.449 million. That is positive cash flow from your operating activities. That's what we'd expect to see. You're raising money then to invest in your infrastructure to pay down debt. So that's the positive cash flow coming from your operations. From that, then you can see about $1.13 million in net debt repayments. You did add one small, relatively small loan of $1.3 million on the year, but repaid the other loans to the tune of about 2.5. And then you invested 17 million in infrastructure. So on a net basis, your cash position did decrease somewhat, about 1.36 million. Schedule of accumulated surplus is a key schedule to the statements. It shows the breakout of the $297 million of accumulated surplus. Again, most of that balance is your investment in capital assets. You can see at the top. There's some unfunded portions of your investment capital assets, so the loans that you borrowed to fund some of that infrastructure, and then various other unfunded amounts, tangible capital asset future, to be financed in the future, some unfunded post-employment benefits and so on. You do have a general surplus on the year of $4 million, which is down somewhat from last year, but it is available to be transferred into reserves or reserve funds should council see fit. You have your investment in Orangeville Hydro, which again is up, and then the reserves and reserve funds here, which exclude the development charges, gas tax, and other obligatory reserve funds, up to about 82 million versus 80 million the year before. And then deferred revenue, which is those other reserve funds which are obligatory development charges, you can see down by about $500,000. Most of the rest of those other obligatory reserve funds up somewhat, and so you can see that in total deferred revenue up to 23.77 million from about 21.4 the year before. And lastly, we have a graph on reserves and reserve funds. In total, about 251.6% of your total tax revenue set aside in reserves and reserve funds. Again, that correlates to your cash and investment position being stronger relative to the other municipalities that we compared you to. Again, not a judgment call on what your infrastructure needs may be, and probably somewhat higher because of deferred capital projects, as we mentioned. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions, but subject to council's review and approval, we'll get our representation letter signed by management, which will allow us to finalize the financial statements and for the municipality to submit its financial information return to the ministry, which is due on May the 31st. And so with that, I'm happy to answer any questions. And I suspect I was over 10 minutes, but I apologize.
No, you were pretty tight on there. That was good.
I tried.
Thank you very much, Mr. Short. Was there questions at all for Mr. Short from council? None. I'm impressed. You nailed it. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you very much. Next up, 12.5, I will call Tim Thompson, Waterworks Compliance Officer, to give us an update on uncommitted water supply. Mr. Thompson.
Thank you, Mayor Post and members of council. I appreciate this opportunity to appear before you to what I hope provide a simplified update on the report that's coming a little bit later in the agenda on the update on the uncommitted water supply capacity. So what I've tried to do with this brief presentation is take a lot of the numbers and the graphs and a lot of the details in the actual council report and simplify it down such that it's perhaps a little bit easier to understand and also provides a big picture overview of the situation with the municipal supply wells for Orangeville. So I wanted to start with the current situation, and suffice it to say the town does have a limited water supply capacity available to service future developments beyond what is currently approved or in progress towards approval. So I wanted to make that distinction that the developments that are on the books, so to speak, and have been approved by council previously and have had water supplies allocated to them, we have capacity for those developments. We also have capacity for and I don't know what the technical term is, but the other approvals that are sort of in the works, or the other developments that are in the works but haven't received their approvals yet. So we do have what I would consider very limited water supply capacity, and we'll get into the actual number in a minute or two. One thing I wanted to highlight is the existing town wells that we have. Their average service life right now is 34 years. So our wells are aging. I think our youngest well in terms of years of supply service is 17 years, with our oldest being 51 years of service. Typically, you can count on approximately a 50-year service life for a well. However, you have to take into consideration that during that 50-year service life, you may and likely will see a reduction in supply capacity, much like your car doesn't work as well after you've driven it for many years. It's the same thing with the wells. You can take steps to rehabilitate and repair them, but chances are you're never going to get back up to what it was like when it was new. So we're seeing overall that Orangeville's wells are towards the older end of the age spectrum. And because of that, several of our wells have experienced declines in their efficiency and their supply capacity. So each year, staff looks at the performance of the wells and makes recommendations with regards to safe water supply capacity for each well, recognizing that some wells no longer are capable of producing the water that they were originally permitted for, that the volume has gone down. And currently, we have supply capacity reductions in place at wells 2A, 6, 7, and 11. And those wells have had service capacity reductions to varying degrees, some more than others, depending on the conditions at each specific well. So obviously the town still needs the water. We still need to meet supply demands each day throughout the year. So when there's lost capacity at some of the wells, that water supply obviously has to be made up at some of the other existing wells. And what I've seen through the numbers and what we've been able to determine is that the majority of the supply deficit from the wells that have had reduced capacity, that has been made up mostly by wells 5 and 5A. Wells 5 and 5A are our biggest producing wells. On any typical year, they provide about 45% of the town's water supply. So they're very critical to our overall water supply capacity. And we've been calling on those two wells quite a bit over the last few years to make up for the lost capacity at those other wells that I mentioned. Well 6, for example, has declined the most. Currently, its safe pumping capacity is only 38% of its permitted rate. So when I say permitted rate, that's what the Ministry of the Environment permits the well for at a maximum water supply taking per day. So in an ideal circumstance, your well would be able to pump its permitted rate. Well 6 has lost so much capacity that we're only able to safely pump it at 38% of its permitted capacity. So that's why those numbers get lowered. And when they go into the calculations for uncommitted reserve capacity, that number becomes smaller and smaller as these numbers are reduced at the individual wells. So the next point I just wanted to make was that the permitted rate, if you were to take all of the municipal supply wells that we have right now, add up their individual permitted rates, you get a total of 17,394 cubic meters per day. But with the current restrictions at those 4 wells that I mentioned previously, we're down to 14,523 cubic meters per day. And a cubic meter is 1,000 liters, just to help put that into perspective. So that would be 14.5 million liters a day, but cubic meters is a little easier to work with. And that's 83% of the permitted rate. So it may not sound like a lot, but it does make a difference, particularly when you're dealing with maximum day demand that we see during the warm summer months, where we will see maximum day, maximum week demands, and there's added stress put on the system. The other thing I wanted to note in terms of our current situation are wells 8B and 8C. Those 2 wells feed directly into the Dudgeon Reservoir, which is on Blind Line, just up towards the north limit of town. And well 10, which is the one that's on Highway 10 at the bottom of the hill as you go out of town. It's on the right-hand side. Those 2 wells are currently out of service for repair and maintenance work, and it's very likely that they will be out of service throughout the balance of 2024. So staff are monitoring that situation very closely because obviously we're going to have to get through the summer of 2024 without those 2 wells. So we'll be monitoring that situation very closely. I'll be doing regular updates on the supply capacity versus demand. And if necessary, we may need to take steps to reduce demand, such as perhaps instituting more restrictions on lawn watering, et cetera. But hopefully we won't get to that. So this is a table that is in the report, and I just wanted to touch on the highlights of this table. So going down the left-hand side, we have the well number. So we have the 12 well fields, and then the second column shows the service age. So we already talked about the average age being about 34 years old, and we can see that actually our oldest well, is 53 years old. And that would be well 5, where our youngest well is well 12, which makes sense. It's the one that was most recently connected to the system, although that was in 2007, is 17 years old. The next column over is that maximum daily permitted taking that I referenced a little bit earlier. So that's the maximum amount that we're allowed to take under our permit to take water under ideal circumstances. But the column to the right of that is the current safe pumping capacity. And we can see, if we look at the percentage column to the right of that, that the 4 wells that are identified as being less than 100%, again, are 2A, 6, 7, and 11, with the worst one being 6 down at the 38%. The next column I've added just to indicate whatever changes were made with the safe pumping capacity for this particular council update. So the only number that changed this year from last year's report was well 11, which I reduced by an additional 30 cubic meters per day to take that down to 820 cubic meters per day. That was because we're continuing to see some declines at that well, but it is scheduled for rehabilitation work later this year. And then the last 2 columns, I just tried to show what the maximum day taking last year from each individual well was and compare that to its safe pumping capacity. And as you would expect, the wells that have reduced supply capacities, generally their stress factor exceeded 1, which means that we pumped more on it, the maximum day at that well, than what our recommended safe pumping capacity is. So in other words, we're pushing the envelope a little bit at that one, where a lot of the other wells are not up to 1. We're pumping them at their maximum day is less than what they're currently capable of. So the next 2 tables here I wanted to show you, and we'll start perhaps with the one on the right, which is the graph. And this is a very interesting graph. It stretches from 1994 through to 2023. And just noticing that the title should be updated to 2023, but it does go to 2023. And it shows 4 things, and we'll go back to the 2 most important lines, which are the dashed purple line and the red line with the triangles. But the green line with the green circles, we can see that's the household count. And we can see that there was that period of fairly high growth in the late 1990s, which the town experienced. And then the rate of growth since about the year 2000 has been relatively constant. The slope of the line has stayed pretty much the same. Interestingly, the blue line with the blue squares is the average day demand. And you'll notice that there's a dip in the blue line and in the red line in 2003. That was the year that universal water metering took effect for residential water metering. And what that did basically was curtail or significantly reduce the discretionary use of water, mostly for lawn watering, people using water to wash their driveways, those sorts of things. So what we've seen is a decline in the maximum day demand, which was fairly significant. You can see that in the red triangle line. And that maximum day demand has now stayed constant at around 12,000 cubic meters per day. So keeping in mind, we have the 12,000 cubic meter per day compared to our 14,523 cubic meter per day safe pumping capacity, which is the dotted purple line on the top. So you can see that the water metering has bought us about 20 years of time in terms of lowering that maximum day demand for the last 20 years and keeping it relatively steady, even though population has increased. Unfortunately, we're continuing to see that gradual decline in the purple line, which is the safe pumping capacity of the existing wells. And as those two lines get closer together, that's our factor of safety getting smaller and smaller. So I thought that graph kind of neatly sums up a lot of numbers, but puts it into a graph that you can easily follow. And then the table to the left, last year's report had a huge spreadsheet attached to it, and it had all kinds of numbers and columns. And I was asked this year to simplify it down, so that this is the result of that simplification process, is the table on the left. So we can see that the top line is the safe pumping capacity of 14,523, and our average maximum day demand for the last 5 years is 11,770. So to calculate your hydraulic reserve capacity, which is what you have available and is unaccounted or is uncommitted, you subtract the two numbers, and that gives us 2,753 cubic meters per day. But then we have to take off those developments that are approved and on the books that I mentioned earlier. That totals 1,880 cubic meters per day, leaving us with an uncommitted reserve capacity of 873 cubic meters per day. And what I did also this year is I've added a couple of new things here where I've put that number as an equivalent single family dwelling equivalent, the SFDE, and also to a person's count. So trying to say, okay, if we have this many cubic meters of water available, roughly what would that allow the town to grow in terms of people? So it kind of helps put it into perspective. So that 873 cubic meters per day is equivalent to about 779 single family dwellings, or about 2,103 people, using the the latest StatsCan value of about 2.7 people per household. Then we move down to the bottom part where it says active applications in progress. So those are the ones that have submitted the applications, but they haven't been approved. So we know that if they're approved, eventually they're going to want their piece of the pie and they're going to want their water supply. So that totals another 690 cubic meters per day. So you subtract that from the 873 above, you're left with 183 cubic meters per day, which isn't very much. It's much less than what I would consider to be a safe amount. In fact, in the report, I mentioned that typically we should try to strive for a reserve capacity of about 2,000 cubic meters per day. That allows us to handle our maximum day demand with the firm capacity of the system, which is having our largest well out of service, which in this case would be well 5 and 5A. So you have to plan for the worst and hope for the best. So that's why I would recommend 2,000, and you can see here we have 183, which would only equal another 163 homes or about 440 people. So you can see that the numbers are starting to get quite small. So this graph here, I think puts it into perspective. This is the pie graph I update every year. And we can see the biggest slice of the pie is the red one on the right. That's wells 5 and 5A. And last year they provided almost 41% of the town's water. Well 6, which is the light blue one at the bottom, even with its reduced capacity and age of 49 years of service, it's still providing 15% of the water supply. So we can see that 5 and 5A and 6, just those two well fields alone account for more than 50% of the town water supply. Not all wells are created equal. You can have a variety of different wells into the same aquifer, but they're not necessarily going to be able to produce the same amount of water due to their location, the underground formations, and any environmental impacts that you have to account for. I'll try and move along here. I'm close to the end here. This one I just wanted to put together to show our reliance on wells 5 and 5A. So the red line moving up and down shows that, back in the 1980s, obviously we had fewer wells, but over 60% of the town's supply came from 5 and 5A. That typically was in the 30% through the 1990s, rose into the 40% in the early 2000s, and then dropped in about 2015. We had brought on some additional supply in 2007, and we were able to rely a little bit less on wells 5 and 5A. But what we've seen starting in about 2016 is wells 5 and 5A are now back up over 40% of the town's supply. And again, I had mentioned earlier that that's partly due to trying to make up for lost supply at those other wells. So the next steps, continue our water conservation efforts. Last November of 2023, we closed the municipal truck fill station at the operations center. We were selling water to contractors, both who were working in and out of town. So we've permanently closed that station. Operations staff have undertaken a unidirectional water main flushing program. Basically, that's trying to flush the system in an effective way while minimizing the amount of water wastage. So in other words, making the process more efficient. We've got the new smart water meters that will be installed soon. Not only will that provide residents with a better tool to monitor their water usage, it will also allow the town to better track the usage overall. We're looking at district water metering to help with pinpointing unaccounted for water. We've got potential changes to the lawn watering bylaw, which I understand are coming to council soon. And we also have a report on water conservation efforts that's coming to council later in 2024. And I know planning has been working on a new water supply allocation policy that will help us allocate water in a fair and equitable way, but at the same time promoting the town's best interests. So we're going to continue the process to connect the Poland well. I know that one's been on the books for a long time. That has taken a lot longer than we had ever anticipated. Well 6, we're going to be re-drilling that well. Well, actually not, we're going to be drilling a replacement well 6 adjacent to the existing well 6. Well 6 right now, it's got a liner in it and a screen that has been put in over the years to increase its longevity. But what that's done is severely limited our ability to rehabilitate that well. So we're looking to drill a replacement well on the same site, 10 to 15 meters away, and hopefully restore that lost capacity and then just close off the existing well 6 that's there now. Continued rehab and careful management of the existing wells. I would also recommend that we begin working on finding and connecting the next water supply source, because as we've seen with Poland well, it does take a long time, and our wells aren't getting any younger. So that would be a good recommendation. And also to carefully monitor the condition and performance of the existing wells and update the supply capacity calcs, which is what we're doing each year at about this time. And that's all I had. So hopefully that helps. And if there's any questions, I'll try and answer them.
Thank you very much, Mr. Thompson. Appreciate that very thorough report. I will turn it over to council for questions. Councillor Andrews, Deputy Mayor, and Councillor McIntosh. Okay, Deputy Mayor, then Councillor Andrews.
Always so polite. Thank you very much for your report, Mr. Thompson. It gives me a little bit of stress and strain as I hear it. You want to make sure everything is going to be okay for our residents. I know we're in good hands. There's no sense going down that road. But I am curious, the Poland well itself, when it comes on, if we went back to your pie chart and we saw 5A at the 40%, what does Poland well become? Is it the main thrust? What will it be as a percentage if you look ahead?
The Poland well, yes, sorry, through you, your worship, to Deputy Mayor Taylor. The Poland well initially will be permitted at about 25 liters per second, moving to 42 liters per second, hopefully in a few years after it's been connected and we've been able to gather some monitoring data on it to support the full permitted rate. To put it into perspective, 42 liters per second is like another well 6. Well 6, when it was working at its full capacity, was 42 liters per second. So we have to subtract, I believe it's 117 cubic meters per day, which is the agreed supply that we're going to give to the Amaranth side of the road for their development. But the Poland well will probably, I would see it slotting in behind well 5 and 5A, a rehabbed well 6, and then Poland would probably be the third big boy to supply us. So we're very anxious to get that well connected. It's just there's been a lot of regulatory hoops and source water protection things that, to be fair, weren't foreseen by previous staff years ago when this whole process started. So it's been very protracted, but it will be one of our top 3 for sure. It'll be a big player.
Thank you. Councillor Andrews.
Thank you, Your Worship. And Mr. Thompson, I truly appreciate the detail that you've provided with this report, and also, of course, Ryan as well, who's been involved with this under the leadership of Mr. Koselleck. A lot of information here that feels like I've been looking at my blood pressure going back and forth with all the graphs here. And water is a precious commodity for us in our community, and every community. You know, we've got the pressures of climate change. I know that we've had quite a bit of rain here tonight, and thank goodness the month of May has been, and hopefully will continue to provide a little more rain. But I'm looking at the ebbs and flows of what you highlighted here, and you've indicated the remediation of well number 6, its depletion down to 38% of performance capacity, the anticipation, we've been waiting since the last term for the Poland well, and we're still waiting, which is probably going to take another, as you've indicated in the report quite thoroughly, this could take 2 to 3 years because of the uniqueness. This is the first new well in the province of Ontario that falls under the new jurisdiction and guidelines. What caught my attention was not only the pressure that we have on 5 and 5A, but does that potentially deplete? I know that we are anticipating other wells at some point, but does this put a precarious amount of pressure on some of the existing wells if we're going to eventually take 6 offline for remediation? You know, and if we have a worst case scenario, what is that worst case scenario? And I know you've indicated conservation ideas, and I'm looking forward to that report, and I'll have another comment in just a second, but I'd like to just hear your quick take on that.
Yes, through you, Your Worship, to Councillor Andrews. Well 5, you'll see in the report, I've left well 5 and 5A at their fully permitted 6,000 cubic meters per day capacity. Those wells, though, however, there's a caveat with that. I'm noticing that there's starting to be a decline in the water levels at those 2 wells. And I think what that is, it's twofold. One, the over-reliance on those wells and making up for the lost capacity. But number 2, the fact that it's very, very difficult, as you can see by the pie graph, to take those wells out of service for the perhaps 3-4 weeks, a month, to properly rehabilitate those wells. Those wells 5 and 5A are due for rehabilitation. And I think if we can get them offline, properly rehabilitate them, we'll get them back up to we'll be confident in that 6,000. Right now, I'm starting to see a longer term decline in those wells since about 2017. So I've said in the report that 6,000 for now, but I may have to look at reducing that slightly. I hope not. Staff are taking steps to arrange with a water system modeling contractor to do computerized modeling of our water system, such that we can manipulate the system, change some valving, set points on our supply and our storage levels, such that we're going to be able to take well 5 and 5A offline probably in 2025, because as you know, there's the big project right now at well 5 and 5A for the storage facility and the new high lift pump. So the rehab work won't take place this year, but I'm hoping in 2025 we'll be able to do that and do the modeling work, the computerized modeling work this year, so that next year when we want to take it offline, we know, okay, tweak this valve, change that set point, balance the system. Because as you can imagine from looking at that pie graph, taking well 5 and 5A out of service puts a major stress on the system. And that's part and parcel of them being just such a big player in the supply.
Again, Your Worship, I love your detail and like the way you've simplified it for the general public to understand, because water can be very complex and the management of it. Conservation is going to be very important, and the embracement of that of our community is going to be critical. And, I'm just thinking out of the box. There was a point in time in the history of our town where we utilized rain barrels. And I'm not sure where that report is. I know that you've referenced it in this report, that it's coming at some point. But, I would encourage members of our community, as much as we have the precious commodity that's sitting in front of us, we're also at a juxtaposition where we're going to have to think about it strategically. And I would personally invest in my own, rain barrels. I think that, with Mother Nature providing us with, as we have it tonight, some rain, great way of at least taking care of our own properties. I hope that other members of our community would embrace that same kind of thinking as well.
Councillor McIntosh and then Councillor Prendergast.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, Tim, for that report. My question was in regards to the Pullen Well, which, excuse me, has been answered. I guess I just wanted to say, I know when we first brought out water meters, it was going to be the end of the town. It was a big fight, and some politicians even voted against it. And I just thank goodness that today we had them, and good work. Thank you.
Through you, Your Worship, to Councillor McIntosh, I think we would have been having this discussion a lot sooner had it not been for water meters, because as you can see, that purple line has been creeping down while the red line has remained fairly stable. And we noticed that big drop and then the stability post 2003. So it did make a big difference.
Thank you. Councillor Prendergast.
Thank you, Mayor Post, through you. I'm quite alarmed, to be honest, after hearing this report and reading it. With the average lifespan of a well being 35 years and our three primary producing wells being 49, 47, and 53 years old, I wonder what the success rate is to rehabilitate those wells, and what is the life expectancy of a well at the top end?
Through you, Your Worship, to Councillor Prendergast, the average, I would say the average lifespan of a well is approximately 50 years. Obviously, some last less, some last more. There's municipalities in Ontario that have had wells that are still in service after almost 100 years. The average service life of the Orangeville wells is 34. The youngest is 17, the oldest is 53. And unfortunately, the one that's 53 is well 5. It was first connected to the town system in 1971, and it's been doing yeoman service ever since. And it needs a little bit of TLC. I always look at it as the law of diminishing returns. It's like the new car. As soon as you drive it off the lot, it's never going to be as good as it was when you first got it. And it's the same thing with the wells. If you think about the lifespan of a well, and over the years, as the well draws water through the fractures to a single point source, that where it's like a straw in a cup, right? You're pulling it towards the well. And what happens in the aquifers, then you then get that movement. And over time, the mineral deposits, the sands, the silts, the hardness of the water all contribute to plugging up the fractures closest to the well. And you can rehabilitate that through acidization, airlifting, surging, pump testing, etc. But you're unlikely to get it back to the 100% that you started with. So usually it's this law. I call it the law of diminishing returns. You may reach a point where it just stabilizes and the well will continue on. It may say decrease to 75% and then it sticks at 75% for the next 30 years. Or you may get a situation like well 6 where like it was pumping at 100% when I started with the town. And so it's declined significantly over the years. And because of the structure that's there, it's not possible to rehabilitate that well any longer. So yes, we have the water supply to allocate to those currently approved ones, plus the ones that I call on the books that haven't been approved yet. But with only 183 cubic meters per day left, I think we need to exercise prudence, extreme prudence over the next few years until we can get well 6 back up on its feet, hopefully, and get the Pullen Well connected.
Just a follow-up. That's exactly what I was going to say. In the next steps, water conservation, water meters, They will make an incremental difference, but we need the pole and well to be online before we approve any more developments. And to be honest, a household count of 2.7, I see most households being quite larger than that. And now the new trend, multi-generational homes, it can be more like 6 or 8. So I think we need to be so prudent when it comes to our water. It's a precious resource, and we owe it to the current residents of the town to really make sure that we have enough water for the people that live here now.
Thank you, Councillor Prendergast. Any additional questions from members? I just wanted to make the comment that upcoming at our town hall, we are going to be talking about water conservation, which is on Wednesday at 6:30. So if residents do have questions, by all means, please come and join us there. I also wanted to note that in our government advocacy plan that's coming up in a report, our #1 priority is pull and well. So we are going to continue to advocate to the province to help us get that online quickly.
Yes, I think anything that can be done to speed up the process.
Absolutely.
Because the ministry is a big entity. They don't necessarily know what's going on at the ground floor here in Orangeville. We're just another municipality out of 700 and something in the province of Ontario. So
thank you.
Yeah.
CAO Smith.
Yeah, thank you very much. And through you, Your Worship, I just wanted to piggyback on what Councillor Prendergast is saying is it's critically important, I think, especially when water becomes a more valuable resource, is that when we allocate water to developments, there is some time limitation put it on it as well. We don't want a development to receive an allocation and then sit for 10 years while others are looking for it. So we'll be working with staff to develop some additional policy around that. Other communities are following that. We don't want those SDE, single detached equivalent, to be chips in development applications or a sale of properties to others, as has happened in other communities.
Thank you very much. Any additional questions? Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Thompson, for being here today. Up next, we have Karen Jones from 23 York Street. If you just want to take the stand there, Ms. Jones. If you can just have a seat, get close to the mic so we can hear you that way.
Karen Jones, 23 York Street, L9W1L7. Mayor and members of council and staff. And if I'd known, I would have requested extra time. I didn't know you could do that. So thanking you in advance for 5 uninterrupted minutes of presentation. I have read and appreciate Mr. Ward's time and concern in providing this report. My specific request, however, was to approach York Street as a historic conservation district and not individual status. Heritage Orangeville also supported a district designation over individual property designation and requested from planning a report pertaining to this at their December 21st, 2023 meeting. A report from planning presented to Heritage Orangeville on January 18th, 2024 recommended individual designation. Heritage Orangeville again requested a report with reference specifically to Heritage Designation District. The report being received this evening also strongly suggests individual designation. On September the 10th, 2018, the HCD plan was suspended. York Street took up the challenge and wanted to be designated a historic conservation district in 2018. And they still desire this, perhaps even more so today. What can council do to help this become a reality for a little street that has fought so bravely to preserve its historic and cultural significance? 1997, downtown traffic study defeated. 2011, defeated an aggressive move from the business improvement area to expand onto York Street. 2017, 100% participation to retain narrow street width, keep our trees, maintain neighborhood historic significance. 2018, more than 75% of York Street were on board for designation as a historic district. There are sweeping changes implemented across Ontario regarding elimination of non-designated properties by December 31st, 2024. That's why councils across Ontario are demanding an extension to this draconian legislation. Subject to opportunities for appeal have been mentioned several times in this study. However, I understood that appeal processes existed prior to the implementation of Bill 23. The Merchants and Prince of Wales study is a well-presented, significant document that is still relevant today and written by a qualified individual. If there were procedural constraints in the official town plan to formally retaining and paying Heritage Orangeville members to provide consulting services, then how did this happen? Planning stated in the study, staff do not have the heritage expertise or resource capacity to do in-house. So we do not have the experience, the money, or staff, and it is probably not in their job description to do this. There are communities that have a heritage planner on staff as a part-time consultant. Maybe we could hire them on their days off. The 2024 operating budget for the planning division includes funds available to retain a consultant to support town-initiated planning reviews and assignments. How much can Heritage have of this? What if the procurement cost does not exceed $30,000? Any hopes there? What about some of the interest money on the sale of the railroad? Google Orangeville and up pops historic charm with a listing of historic items underneath. York Street wants historic conservation designation because we are a community. People actually desire the stability of neighborhoods with certain rules. This is not about NIMBYism, it's about preserving what we have. Homes are rarely up for sale on our street. Bill 23 requires 25% of the properties must satisfy 2 or more criteria to determine an area of cultural heritage or value. We drive that out of the park. And speaking of park, residents from all over Orangeville visit our street. They drive and park in the senior center and in the courthouse, and they walk the streets. They come because it's the image and the reality of what so many streets don't have. It's beautiful and people take care of it. It's a connection to another era. They stop, they talk. What can council do to help us attain this? I ask you that the phrase, and I quote, and that an intention to designate the properties surrounding York Street as a heritage conservation district not be pursued at this time, unquote, be removed from report number INS 2024-032 before it is received by council. And thank you, Mayor Post and members of council, for allowing me the opportunity to voice my opinion. If I'd known I could have had more time, there would be a lot more specifics.
Thank you so much, Ms. Jones, for your advocacy. I will open it up if members of council have questions, but we will be dealing with this report a little bit later in the agenda. It is my intent to pull it out of the consent agenda so that we do have some discussion. And I do have an amended motion drafted and ready to go that I intend to present. But if any members of council do have questions at this time, we can ask them. Seeing none. Okay. Thank you very much, Ms. Jones.
Mayor Post, I'd like to say you did receive the petition today.
We did. Thank you. It's in the agenda. Yep. Thank you very much. Up next, we have Mary Jane Gerber from 7 York Street to talk about York Street designation as well.
Good evening. I am not as well researched as my beloved neighbor. However, I'm Mary Jane Gerber, and we have lived at 7 York Street for 37 years. And we love our street, and we are deeply concerned about the recommendation in this report. Our street features multiple heritage homes, and it's considered by many in the town to be a unique and beautiful street. And along with many of our neighbors, my husband and I have just gone through an extensive renovation and addition to our house that we saved and planned for 30 years. And part of our research and part of our passion for doing this was to maintain the beauty and the heritage of the house. And we worked with the Heritage Planning Committee, and we believe that what we achieved is something that we can be pleased with. And our neighbors have been doing the same. When you drive down York Street, you see so many homes that have been updated and renovated. And as Karen so beautifully laid out, we have been very passionate about protecting the beauty and heritage of our street. So I would just like to add my voice to preserving the charm that attracts Orangeville residents and tourists to York Street. Thank you for letting me speak.
Thank you very much for your advocacy as well. Before you get up, I just want to make sure that no members of council have questions. Anybody?
Sorry.
Nope, you're good. Thank you so much for being here. At this time, we've finished our delegations. We are going to take a 5-minute break. So if everybody can resume back at 8:55 and we'll get into the next part of the meeting. Okay, welcome back, everybody. We are into the portion of the agenda now, which is known as the consent agenda. The items have been compiled under the consent agenda to facilitate a single vote for council consideration. Council may remove any item from the consent agenda for individual consideration. I'm going to start, which normally I don't, but I'm going to remove 13.1.9, which is the Affordable Housing Task Force Terms of Reference, because we do need to appoint 2 members of council. I'm also going to remove 13.1.11, the community grant funding allocations, because we have received a conflict from the deputy mayor. And lastly, I would like to remove the York Street Heritage Conservation District for discussion for council. I would now turn it over to any members of council who also have any additional. Councillor Andrews.
Thank you, Your Worship. I too was going to pull out 13.1.9 regarding the Affordable Housing Task Force. I'd like to pull out 13.1.7, which is the leasing report.
Okay, I didn't see that one coming. Perfect.
I know.
Was there any others that any members of council would like to remove from the consent agenda? Okay, seeing none. So the recommendation then is that all consent agenda items for the current council meeting listed under 13.1 staff reports, 13.2 correspondence, and 13.3 committee board members, more minutes be received or approved as presented, with the exception of the items removed for individual consideration, which are, as a reminder, 13.1.7 financing leases outstanding, 13.1.9 the Affordable Housing Task Force Terms of Reference, 13.1.11 2024 community grant funding allocations, and 13.1.14 York Street Heritage Conservation District. Can I have a motion, please? Councillor Andrews and Deputy Mayor, all in favor? And those consent agenda items are carried unanimously. We will now turn to 13.1.7. To get that onto the floor, I do just need to move the motion in there. The recommendation is that report CPS 2024-29 financing leases outstanding 2023 be received. Can I have a mover to get that on the floor for discussion? Councillor Stevens and Councillor McIntosh. Councillor Andrews, I will turn it to you.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. And this is just a quick point of reference, and I don't want to spend too much time, but I did speak with staff on this particular item, and it is zeroing in on the vehicles that are utilized for transit. And these would be the Ram Pro Master vehicles. And it's a rather substantial amount allocation. And again, it's just adding or asking for clarification. Mr. Koselleck or Mr. Deluce, I think, may be available as well online. We had a robust conversation, and I appreciated his response to my question. Just for the sake of clarification, the reason I zeroed in on this was the allocation per month. I thought it was very high for vehicles that I have a perception that may not be being used as often as they should be. I know that there is a process in place regarding the transit activity, including on demand and so on and so forth. But for the general public, just for the sake of getting some clarification, I'm wondering if either you, Mr. Koselleck, or Mr. Deluce might be able to just provide some clarification to the cost.
Mr. Koselleck, I'll start with you.
Through your worship, yes, the lease for the buses, I think it's roughly $29,000 per year for each of the mini buses. Right now, they're being used to augment our fleet. When we have school buses on there, we'll run those in addition to the school buses to be able to provide accessible transit when we can. Those will be used when the on-demand service comes on, but at this time, we're using to augment the fleet during times we have the school buses, so we can have the accessible components as part of it.
And just piggybacking on that, how often would they be used? Again, I'm just looking at the ROI on that based on the utilization.
Through your worship, I'd have to double check on the numbers. I don't know off the top of my head. I believe Mr. Deluce is online. He may have more information on it.
Mr. Deluce, did you want to answer that one? I see him online there.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you to Councillor Andrews. The short of it is that they are used to augment and supplement when we don't have full use or accessible buses on route. We will get requests from residents and use them. I can't say that they're used often. They are used to augment and to supplement the fleet for those special needs for persons with mobility issues. I don't have the exact number in front of me, as Mr. Koselleck indicated, but I certainly could get that for you and for the rest of council, should that be desired.
Councillor Andrews?
I'm fine with Mr. Deluce's
wonderful
response. Thank you.
Thank you. Was there any additional questions from members of council on that item? Okay, I'll call the vote. All in favor? And that is carried unanimously. Item 13.1.9 is the Affordable Housing Task Force Terms of Reference. Before we put the motion on the floor, I do need to ask if there are members of council who are interested in being a part of it. Councillor Andrews?
Yes, Your Worship, I would like to put my name forward as I was the chair of the Homelessness Task Force, which we provided a report to council on the 29th with the recommendation of this particular formation of the new Affordable Housing Task Force. And I would really enjoy being a part of it.
Thank you very much, Councillor Andrews, for putting your hand up. Was there other members of council who were interested in putting their hand up for this particular committee? Yeah, Deputy Mayor?
Your Worship, I have great interest in this as well, and I'd be happy to support Councillor Andrews in the quest. But if someone else from council would like to put their name forward, I would step aside. But if not, I would be more than pleased to serve with you, Councillor Andrews.
Was there anybody else who was interested in putting their hand up? Councillor Prendergast?
I would be interested. My schedule is limited, so perhaps that might not work with when you are planning on meeting. But I have great interest in finding affordable housing for those in needs of supports within our community and look at it from a different perspective, maybe.
Anybody else from this side of the table? No, we're good. Okay, so we need to move forward with a recommendation. Deputy Mayor, do you want to move ahead or would you like to forfeit that to Councillor Prendergast?
Your Worship, candidly, my schedule is full, but I have great interest in it and wanted to make sure it went forward. So if Councillor Prendergast would like to do this, then I will step aside.
Perfect. Okay. So I will ask for the recommendation then to read that report CPS 2024-32, Affordable Housing Task Force Terms of Reference be received, and that Council approve the terms of reference for the Affordable Housing Task Force as presented, and that Council appoint the following 2 members of Council to the Affordable Housing Task Force. Firstly, Councillor Joe Andrews, and secondly, Councillor Tess Prendergast. Can I have a motion to put that on the floor, please? Councillor Stevens and Councillor McIntosh. Any last comments? Councillor Andrews.
I just wanted to thank staff for their tremendous contribution in assembling the terms of reference, our General Manager of Corporate Services and the Clerks Division as well as CAO Smith, I know was involved. Detailed, provides a very clear perspective of what the objective is regarding this task force with some specific timelines as well. So I look forward to moving ahead with the task force with the assembly and recruitment of members in time for hopefully a September 2024 startup.
Thank you very much, Councillor Andrews. I just wanted to add as well that on Friday I had the opportunity to speak to the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing at a meeting that I was at, and I let him know that this was coming to Council on Monday, and he expressed an interest in visiting our task force to talk about some of the initiatives of the province as well. So I've got his contact information and we'll reach out to him once we're established and try and secure a date for him to come and work with the committee as well. So thank you for putting your hands up, everybody. At this point, if there's no further questions, I will call the vote. All in favor? And that is carried unanimously. The next item, I'm going to move around just a little bit from the report that was in the agenda originally. I'm going to ask that report CPS 2024-38, the 2024 community grant funding allocations be received, and that Council approve distribution of 2024 community grant budgeted funds as recommended by Headwaters Communities in Action from one-time grants with the exception of the Optimist Club. Can I have a motion for that at this point? Councillor McIntosh, seconded by Councillor Andrews. All in favor? And that is carried unanimously. At this time, I will ask that Deputy Mayor leave the room as he has a conflict with that one. You can just go to my office. And part 2 to that separated vote is that Council approve the distribution of 2024 community grant budgeted funds to the Orangeville Optimist Club for $8,700 in one-time grants. Can I have a motion, please? Councillor Andrews and Councillor Sherwood. All in favor? And that is carried unanimously. I'll just knock on the door and get the Deputy Mayor back. Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Okay, we will move on now to item 13.114, the York Street Heritage Conservation District request, which is report INS 2024-32. In order to get this on the floor for discussion, I'm going to move the recommendation in the report that report INS 2024-32 York Street Heritage Conservation District request be received, and that an intention to designate the properties surrounding York Street as a Heritage Conservation District not be pursued at this time, and that due to recent legislative changes to the Ontario Heritage Act resulting from Bill 23, the More Homes Built Faster Act 2022, which impose expiration periods for listed non-designated properties on the town's municipal heritage register, Council requests Heritage Orangeville review its municipal heritage register to determine whether any listed non-designated properties should be removed from the register pursuant to subsection 27-4 of the Ontario Heritage Act, or may be suitable for designation either individually or within a heritage conservation district pursuant to section 29 and 41 of the Ontario Heritage Act, and that staff provide administrative support to Heritage Orangeville for undertaking this review, including the retention of external consultant expertise to administer and implement the findings of the committee's review. Can I get a mover, please, to put the item on the floor for discussion? Deputy Mayor, seconded by Councillor Prendergast. Thank you. Before I turn it over to Council, I would like to make a couple of comments, and I know Councillor Sherwood would as well. I always say quite often that Council makes the best decision when we have a combination of things. One being our expert staff advice, which we've gotten from Mr. Ward in planning, as well as a combination of community participation. And this time, more so than often before, the community has spoken up loudly and clearly in opposition to what was recommended by our town expert. So I spoke with Councillor Sherwood earlier today as chair of Heritage Orangeville and talked about how we could maneuver the situation to make it so that it's appropriate to meet staff recommendations, but also fulfill what the community is looking for. And I think that we've reached that with the motion that I've considered. So I look forward to bringing that forward. But I want to thank the residents of York Street. The residents of York Street have been tireless advocates for the preservation of their street. As a result of that tireless advocacy, the heritage preservation in that area has continued. You can see that on that street, the residents are concerned with preserving the heritage of their properties. They do the work, they maintain their properties. They're all beautiful. They've done a great job, and I love walking down that street. I'm one of the ones who will park and walk down that street as well. I do love being on that street. It's a historic part of our community. So I do want to thank you for your tireless advocacy. I think that goes a long way. I think that there's a way that we can move this forward to get additional community consultation, which I think is required before we pursue a motion to unequivocally move forward with the Heritage Conservation District. And the amendment to the motion that I'm going to propose after Councillor Sherwood has an opportunity, I think will meet that. But I will turn it over to Councillor Sherwood first, and then whenever the time is right, I will move that amendment. Councillor Sherwood.
Thank you very much, Your Worship, and thank you to all of the citizens that have attended this evening. I just wanted to speak on the report and its recommendation, and just let my position be known that I cannot support the part of the staff recommendation that specifically states an intention to designate the property surrounding York Street as a heritage conservation district not be pursued at this time. As you recall, in November 2023, a delegation was made to council to ask that York Street be designated a heritage conservation district. Council unanimously passed a motion to forward the request to the Heritage Orangeville Committee and have staff report back. At their December and January Heritage Orangeville Committee meetings, many York Street residents were in attendance, where staff provided options and they were just presented and discussed. The conclusion of the Heritage Orangeville Committee, which I remind is a provincial mandate advisory committee to council, recommended that council proceed with the designation of York Street. York Street qualifies as a Heritage Conservation District based on meeting multiple criteria under the Planning Act, Ontario Heritage Act, and the new Bill 23 requirements. York Street exceeds many of those requirements as one of the most significantly beautiful heritage characteristic streets in our town. We have to protect our heritage streets such as this one. Our logo states historical charm, and York Street is definitely part of that historical charm. As many of you, as you can tell by the attendance at previous council meetings, Heritage Orangeville meetings, and this evening's meetings, along with the petition containing 26 signatures, a majority of the residents on York Street support the recommendation that Heritage Orangeville Committee supplied. The York Street residents were in support of the study that was received in 2018, and several letters of support were presented to the council at that time. The need for a new study is not necessarily mandated requirement, and council can designate without the approval of property owners. Therefore, but I do not recommend that we go forward with designation tonight. I would suggest that there is no need to hire a consultant to redo a study at a cost of $100,000. That study was already done and received by a previous council. So my recommendation, along with discussions with Mayor Post, once she reads her motion, is that this evening we would hold an open house for the residents to discuss the recommendation to designate York Street as a Heritage Conservation District, and that staff will report back with a recommendation of designation of that street once the open house meeting has been completed and a report come back to council for final approval. In my time on council, I've served as the chair of Heritage Orangeville for 6 years. And at the end of each year, the surplus from the Heritage Orangeville budget has been put in a Heritage Reserve. And that current amount in that fund is approximately $28,000, which isn't mentioned in the report. So Heritage Orangeville is offering to review and update onto the previous study and remove all the other areas in the study and proceed with just York Street and bring the report back for approval and implementation. We could use those funds to have a peer review the study and provide any further recommendations and report back to council. After lots of good discussions with the mayor, we have a motion that I think will reflect my opinions at this time, and I turn it back to the mayor.
Thank you very much, Councillor Sherwood. Before I move forward, was there any members of council who wish to make a comment before I read the motion? Deputy Mayor.
Just ever so briefly, Your Worship. When this went on, 7 or 8 years ago, it was the biggest gong show I've ever seen. And it was, none of us were on council at the time. It was embarrassing to watch. Council handled it very, very poorly. I think already we're handling it very professionally. The thing that I just want to make clear to everyone, so full on declaration, I also live on a historic street. I do not live on York Street. It's just important for everybody else to know that we are talking about one street for this heritage area. We're not talking about any other part of town. We're talking about York Street. So if people are worried about what this means to them, that is a completely different subject, and council is not talking about that at this time. And I just want to make that clear that that's where we are. And why I would support this tonight is because the majority of York residents have made it clear that that's what they want. Otherwise, I would have said no. So just wanted to share that.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Was there any additional comments at this time? Councillor Prendergast.
I just had a question because I think perhaps a lot of residents aren't familiar with what this designation actually affords to residents. I was wondering if someone on town staff could talk about if there's any financial implication for town at all, and what it would do to residents of that street. How would it change their lives, or how would it better their situation?
Mr. Ward, did you want to take that question now? And I will just say that for the residents of York Street, my recommendation does speak to an open house, which would cover a lot of these components, but I'll let Mr. Ward start today.
Thank you, Mayor Post, and through you. So the financial implications are described in the report, and really it's a product of getting to that designation bylaw. The Heritage Act stipulates you've got to embark on a plan, and it does speak to study. Study is not mandatory, unlike a plan, but it is optional, and it is an important tool because it's going to look at the value of the area. And I would say more so important now, given the Bill 23 changes to the Heritage Act that mandated that prescribed criteria be met in order to justify or warrant the designation being pursued. So that study component is important, whether or not it's a review of the past work. I mean, that work was done some time ago. It's still relevant in many respects, but it needs to be reviewed and updated to make sure it meets today's legislative framework. So there's a cost associated with that. There's also a cost to administer the actual plan, and that comes by way of processing heritage permits. For the downtown district, we don't charge fees for that. We absorb those costs because we don't want to be burdensome for property owners within that district. So likelihood is the same approach will be taken for any new districts in the future. What that means for residents is it means that any property in the district, any alteration that's required would need a permit approval. Currently, that is a responsibility of council. We do delegate that to staff in the downtown district. An option like that could be explored for a future district for the York Street area. There is a process involved for that. That's really the cost involved, the administration of the permitting process, and getting to execution of the district plan and designating bylaw.
Thank you, Mr. Ward. Does that cover it? Perfect. Okay, if there's no further questions at this time, I'll read the motion. That report INS 2024-32 York Street Heritage Conservation District request be received, and that an open house meeting with York Street residents be scheduled before the end of June 2024 to explain designation approaches and understand desires and concerns of residents, and that staff schedule one-on-one meetings with residents of York Street to address their questions and concerns, and that planning staff be directed to retain the expertise of a heritage expert to conduct a peer review on the York Street portion of the 2017-2018 study to determine if prescribed HCD criteria is met under the new provincial legislation, and to recommend a preferred approach for designation, whether it be individually or as an HCD, and that planning staff also be directed to hire a heritage planning student to review the municipal non-designated registry properties and determine which properties should be prioritized to pursue individual designation, and to provide recommendations to designate specific properties within the non-designated registry, and that these two projects be funded using the $28,000 from the Heritage Committee reserves and $30,000 from planning operating budget as required, and that staff report back to council on the above. I would be happy to move that motion, and Councillor Sherwood would be happy to second it. Was there any last questions or comments from members of council? Seeing none, I will call the vote. All in favor? And that is carried unanimously. Thank you very much, everybody. We will move now on to notices of motion prior to meeting, of which we have received none. Oh, Deputy Mayor.
I apologize. I really wanted to talk to the board meeting minutes of the library as well. Is it too late to make a comment? It's too late to make a comment. Okay.
Yes, apologies. It's already been done. I did miss a spot in clerks. I know that I saw Lindsay move. I do need to go back to the heritage conservation item just very briefly, because that was an amended motion, an amendment to the motion that we voted on first. Now we need to vote on the original motion as amended. All in favor? That is also carried. Thank you. Sorry about that, Lindsay. I caught it myself before you had to tell me, though. Okay, notices of motion prior to meeting, we have none. Is there any notices of motion that are going to be presented here tonight? No, seeing none. Any announcements? Councillor Andrews.
Thank you, Your Worship. More of a post-event comment. We had two most recently that I wanted to first and foremost acknowledge. This past Sunday, which would have been May 5th, we had the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women Vigil. And I want to compliment the Brave Canoe for hosting an absolutely outstanding vigil. It was impactful, well attended, well organized. So thank you to them. The second was the Economic Development and Culture Department held the Ask the Expert Expo this past week at the Menorah Park, which was also very well organized, well attended, with great experts, and in speaking with the manager of economic development, something that they'll be looking at doing more often, possibly in the fall, but it was very well organized. So publicly just wanted to mention that during council. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Andrews. Any other announcements? Yep. Anybody else? No? Okay. So this coming Wednesday, we do have our town hall, which is May 15th. The doors at Tony Rose are going to open at 6 p.m. and the event will start at 6:30. We do have some fabulous members of staff there who are going to share some information and upcoming information about water conservation. And then, as always, the floor will open to general Q&A, which does not need to be based on water. Deputy Mayor.
Your Worship, I love the town halls and just wanted to compliment you again. It was an election promise and you said that you were going to do that, and kudos to you, and I think they're excellent things. I have had people approach me and say, why weren't you there? What are you doing? Why weren't you at that event? And I'm just wondering if you could inform the public. I know a lot of the galleries left, but for people on camera, why we're not always all there.
Yes, absolutely, Deputy Mayor. Thank you for asking that. When council meets, we can only meet as a quorum if we are in public session, a public council meeting, and they are very prescribed. The intent behind the town halls is to be very casual and allow residents the opportunity to approach council in a very informal, open way. In order for us to move these forward without all of the regulatory folks here keeping us on track and keeping us to the Municipal Act, we can only have up to 3 of us there. So it's always myself and and 2 members of council, and we rotate who those 2 members of council will be, and it's just in order. So we'll constantly fluctuate those. So you will see an announcement of who's coming at each announcement of one. So thank you for bringing that up. The last item that I wanted to talk about is that we are very close to the pool opening, which is very exciting. So tomorrow morning at 8 a.m., there is a mini series of swimming lessons, a 4-week mini series that's going to open for residents to register. So be online at 8 a.m. if you want to get in for that mini session of swimming lessons. Was there any other items of announcement? Councillor Prendergast.
Thank you, Mayor Post. Just let everyone know, if you are a resident of Orangeville and you own your property, you can get a tree through Sustainable Orangeville. It's a free sapling. There are 8 species left. There's a limited quantity left, but there is still some available, and the pickup is on June 1st. So you can head over to orangeville.ca/Sustainable Orangeville to pick up a free tree.
Thank you so much, Councillor Prendergast. Any other last items of announcement? No? Okay, so we will move on to bylaws. The recommendation is that the current council meeting under 17 be listed and read 3 times finally passed. So we've got a mouthful of them, so I'll read them off as quickly as I can. A bylaw to authorize the entering into an execution of an agreement with Andrew Welch for the purposes of providing annual town crier services. A bylaw to authorize the entering into an execution of an amended funding agreement with the Rotary Club of Orangeville for the provision of a replacement playground structure at Rotary Park. A bylaw to regulate the use of certain public property within town of Orangeville for the protection of persons and property and to promote safe use and enjoyment. A bylaw to provide for the levy and collection of taxes required for the town of Orangeville for the year 2024 and for the collection of County of Dufferin and education taxes. A bylaw to appoint Jordan Levechia Smith as deputy clerk for the town of Orangeville. A bylaw to appoint Evan Beaudry, Nicole Dastoli, and Megan Lackenbauer as municipal law enforcement officers for the town of Orangeville. A bylaw to confirm the proceedings of the Council of the Corporation of the town of Orangeville at its closed and regular council meetings held today, May 13th, 2024. Can I have a motion, please? Councillor McIntosh and Councillor Sherwood. Any questions or comments? All in favor? And that is carried unanimously. And I just need a motion to adjourn now. Councillor Stevens and Deputy Mayor, all in favor? And that is also carried unanimously. Have a wonderful evening, everyone.